Yeah, so thank you all very much. And now for the most interesting part of the afternoon.
Valerie. My talk is kind of in two parts. Steve asked me to speak a little bit about my experiences here as a student, and also tell you a little bit about my service dog. So I'll start off with when I came here as a student. I had been at Skidmore College for my first year, and then transferred in here second year. And that was because my father requested that I go to UVA because it was a lot less expensive. It was $1,800 tuition compared to the extremely high $4,000 a year tuition at Skidmore. So I gladly transferred because it brought me closer to Mike, who was at UNC at that time. We started dating in high school, junior year, and so it was important for me to be as close as I could. And he ended up transferring in third year. So that's how we were both able to graduate from here in '75. But when I came, I was assigned to Mallet, and delightfully had the good luck of getting two excellent roommates who are still very dear friends. And I loved the location. It was hard work coming in from an easier school to UVA, but there was no sort of intimidation from the men that were here. They were all in a class that was co-ed to begin with. So coming from high schools that were co-ed weren't any different for them to have women around. But it was not the same story for a particular woman, a couple of years earlier. And I'd like to tell you about her. Her name was Virginia Scott, and she lived in Crozet. I believe she'd gone to William and Mary for a couple of years, and then her mother became extremely ill, and so she moved back. And she did some pro bono work for a young man who was a lawyer here in Charlottesville, and he had graduated from the law school here a couple of years before. And during one of their conversations, he said, where are you going to go to school? And assumed that she would go to UVA since it was local. She said she couldn't go here because she couldn't go back to William and Mary because it was so expensive, and she couldn't go to UVA because it was not co-ed. And his jaw just dropped. He couldn't believe it, and said, "You've got to be kidding." And he said, "Well, then we're just going to have to sue the bastards." So that's what they did. They brought a lawsuit, and the sort of atmosphere at that time is that other schools in Virginia were going co-ed. The man who was the director of admissions, Ernie Earn, who's still around, a fabulous man, was for co-education. And the guy who was the president of the student body at the time was for co-education. But the stodgy old men in the Board of Visitors were against it. So they just didn't want any changes at all to this gentleman's university, where the guys all wore coats and ties to class and were adamantly against having women come. So because of the lawsuit, they reached a compromise and agreed to let a few women in. One fallacy that people think is that it was due to a court order, but that's not true. It never went that far to be a case that was actually tried. They reached a settlement before they ever had to do that. and they agreed to let in a few women, and Virginia Scott was one of them, and 3 others were admitted as well, but they actually never came. So here she was, the only woman in her classes, and she received a great deal of harassment and verbal abuse. She was very bitter toward the university. And then about a couple of years ago, the university held a weekend celebrating women, the anniversary of 40 years of women at the university. And I was able to attend one of the panels, and it was Ernie Earn and John Lowe, the lawyer, and the guy who was the student body president. I can't remember his name. So they were all describing all these details of the events that led up to coeducation here. And at the end of it, they said, oh, and Virginia Scott is here in the audience. And she stood up, and she got the most amazing standing ovation. You just couldn't believe it. And my sister was one of the people who had helped to organize this event in the first place, and she gave her some sort of engraved box, I believe, thanking her for pioneering the way for all the other women who have since come. And I believe that she, at that point, Virginia kind of changed her whole demeanor as to how she perceived the university, because she had not wanted anything to do with it. But then she, I think because of that panel and that ovation, realized that she had, really made a difference for all the rest of the women. And it wasn't easy for the ones that came in after her. The next year, 50 women came, and one of those, there were 50 women who were admitted as transfer students, and my sister was one. She came in from Sweetbriar College. And there was also a class of first years that were admitted, and I believe there were about 400 in that class. So that's the class that I would have been in. So when my sister and her friends came, it was quite different, because they were plopped into a situation where the men had all been there for 2 years already, wearing their coats and ties and with no women in their classes. And they were not at all, the majority were not at all happy about it. And I have a quote from one of the women, and she says, I arrived in the fall of '71 as a third year in the College of Arts and Sciences, soon after a court order that opened the college doors to women. And here you see that there's the fallacy. There really was no court order. What surprised me the most was I was the only woman in all of my classes that first year. I'd expected that there would be more women transferring in from other universities. It was a bit daunting at first to be the only woman in a class full of third and fourth year male students unhappy or uncertain about the changes that had suddenly come to the gentleman's university. One early incident stands out in my memory. Upon arriving a bit early on the first day of my English Lit class, I discovered 5 or 6 fellow classmates seated together in the middle row of the amphitheater-styled room. They became suddenly silent as I chose a seat a few rows closer to the front, then rose en masse and stomped with great fanfare to the back row, mumbling and grumbling their displeasure that these women were ruining their university. It was an awkward moment, but things improved over time, and now 40 years later it makes me smile to see so many young women filling those seats. So you can see that there were incidences of dislike that were quite palpable for these women who came in later. One of the reasons the Board of Visitors said that no women should be allowed to the university was because there weren't enough bathrooms. So you can see that they didn't have much of a leg to stand on in their reasons for not admitting women. Trying to think of some more things that happened. One woman talked to one of her classmates who was a man, and she said, "How did it go with you at the at Student Health with your medical exam?" And he said, "Well, I didn't have to have one." And apparently they had given medical exams to all the women who were admitted, but none to the men. Another thing was that Ernie Earn, when he decided, or when he was trying to find the right type of women students to come into the university, he was looking for gritty women who would burst open the doors rather than just walk around them. I'm afraid to say my sister's one of them. Mike's laughing hard. And it was not typical for the admissions office to call a prospective student's university and ask particulars about these prospective students, but that's what they did to all these women. They wanted to hear directly from the university and make sure that these were the type of women who wouldn't just be soft, but would come bursting through the doors.
Well, Valerie, you certainly have a lot of stories to tell. I hope you're going to be writing this down and follow your husband's lead.
Well,
we'll see a book from you next year about women at UVA, yes?
Mm-hmm.
I am actually going to have to be conscious of the time here
Okay.
because I do know obligations that people have. And we are going to have a follow-up discussion at the Hill House. Melissa Thomas Hunt has just graciously agreed to be over in the Hill House, answering questions and facilitating a conversation about careers and career decision. I forgot the food tonight is special, yummy and special. So please join us there.